Gentlemen, we are gathered here today to celebrate, mourn, react to a day that first we never thought would come, and then, frankly, did not think could come soon enough. Jimbo Fisher is out at Texas A&M, voted out by the Board of Regents this last Thursday, per insider reports. Billy Lucci's tweet is up on the screen right now. And guys, this is a weird day to wake up to that news. All three of us are Aggies and have given everything that we can to this program. Obviously, part of this show is to cover all of college football, but obviously we're Ags at the heart. And if you've been a listener to this show, you know that we've been extremely frustrated with the way things have trended over the last few days, over the last few weeks, months, honestly, the last couple of years. And today, all of that comes to an end. Along with Trey Reeves, Garrett Turney, I'm Mitch Mason. You're watching the Three Technique, a rapid reaction show to Jimbo Fisher officially being terminated. Guys, kind of gut reaction here. What was the first thing that you thought when you woke up to this news?
Well, the first thing I personally thought was, I'm still asleep and I'm somehow hallucinating this ESPN notification on my phone because this seemed out of nowhere, right? Like we've gotten the news that there was a Board of Regents meeting on Thursday, and it felt like this was out of nowhere. They just won 51-10 last night. If they lose to Mississippi State, then the timing makes sense, but it seemed like all conventional wisdom said that Jimbo was going to get another year, not just through the end of this year to finish out against Abilene Christian and LSU, but probably get a shot at making the expanded playoff next year. And none of that happened. It comes out of the blue this morning. My first thought, I told you at church this morning, Mitch, was I'm still asleep and I need to wake up right now because this is a weird dream that I'm having. But here we are. I'm still kind of in shock. I'm going to try to come up with words to say, but man, this is one of the more shocking Sunday mornings that I can remember in a long time. And it's certainly since we started having this podcast.
Yeah, it just doesn't really make sense because, the whole narrative going into the season was that he needed to find a way to win or else he'd be fired. But oh my gosh, that buyout, how are they going to get around it? And all that. And then, we'd had some pretty rough weeks here as Aggies fans, right? There's, bad loss after bad loss after bad loss. And then last night, it actually looked pretty good. And so, you're thinking, well, no way that they're going to fire him at this point. Maybe they finish out strong and it's 8-4, and then they buy him another year. And most Aggie fans are sitting there saying, gosh, man, another year with 8-4, some kind of stupid win over LSU at the end of the season to convince you there's hope just to get stuck with them again. And then, it comes out this morning and, not the thing you expect to hear coming off of a 51-10 victory. Where the only touchdown scored by the opponent in that game was the opening kickoff. So
Yeah.
Definitely not something you expect to see as a fan. But I just think it's almost surreal because, he's been this guy that you thought was going to be the guy to take you up to the top of the mountain. Obviously, some really high highs, some great moments for Aggie fans. Who could forget 7 overtimes? Who could forget the Orange Bowl, winning that one in the COVID year? But kind of funny enough, at the end of that Orange Bowl, he said, "We ain't done yet." He kind of was. That was it. That was really all they got. They didn't play in another bowl game the season after. It was a COVID thing. And then obviously after that, 5-7. But for every high, there was a low, right? There was a moment of, elation when it comes to, oh my gosh, I can't believe we beat Bama at home. I can't believe, we got LSU in 7 overtimes for the first time since joining the SEC and the Orange Bowl and everything else. And then for each one of those, you had an App State and, just an inexplicable loss to a Mississippi school once again. And, coming out sharp and then looking terrible the next week. And so, I don't know, it's a confusing tenure for Jimbo at A&M because there were some really great moments and some real highs, but man, there were some lows and he just had to go at a certain point.
Yeah. I agree. I covered this team in 2018, his first year on campus. My last game was as a student was that 7 overtime victory over LSU, and so yeah, it felt like this was the turning of the tide. This was a coach that was going to finally realize all of the potential that A&M had with facilities, and he did a great job pushing for new football facilities, with the recruiting. He did a great job building one of the best rosters in college football. He had the highest rating recruiting class ever in 2022. And yet we sit here, not even through year 6, and Jimbo finishes with a 45-25 record at Texas A&M, a 26-21 mark in the SEC. And guys, I mean, that just is not going to get it done when you've got your chancellor, when you've got your president handing him a plaque that has a, blank national championship date in it. Like, that can't be the standard.
Does that just get passed on to the next coach? Like they etch out Jimbo's name and whoever the next one is, like that's just
like put a little like whiteout or something like that,
yeah,
just yeah.
yeah, plaque over it, something like that.
Yeah.
They should just throw it straight in the incinerator. That's a curse. It's like the Cubs thing with the goat and whatever else. It's just a curse.
It's the golden calf.
Yeah.
And we've paid for it. Yeah. So, first of all, if you're, whether you're hanging with us in the live show, maybe you're watching this later, we'd love to know what your thoughts are on Jimbo Fisher and his tenure, whether you're an Aggie or not. Obviously, the sentiment around the nation has been that he's an extremely overrated coach who is all bark and no bite. And we just kind of rehashed. He certainly had moments where there was plenty of bite to it. It felt like this team was trending in the right direction, but guys, for whatever reason, he just couldn't get over the hump. He couldn't get a road win in the last 2 years, which is insane to say. Jimbo on the road was just not good, and his record shows it. One kind of final dagger is finally the Jimbo Fisher Kevin Sumlin comparisons can go to die. I think we'll probably get those fired up with our next coach, whoever that ends up being. And we will talk about that in just a minute. But Kevin Sumlin finished his tenure in A&M with a 51-26 mark. So officially, the Aggies had more overall success, wins, losses under Sumlin than they did Jimbo. That 5-7 season obviously kind of disparages the numbers a little bit, and A&M never reached the highest of highs that they did under Jimbo. So, I think that comparison's a little bit of a wash. But guys, now there are a bunch of questions that we've got to ask. First of all, I think the first question is, why now? This was such a bizarre timing. A&M drubbed Mississippi State 51-10 in their final SEC home game last night. And yet the first thing that we're waking up to is Jimbo has been dismissed. Trey, let's start with you. Theories on why Sunday, November 12th was the magic moment to let Jimbo go.
Y'all's guess is as good as mine. I don't really have a theory. In my mind, he was getting next year going into this game. Like if you were going to make a move, you had a meltdown at Tennessee. You had a meltdown at Ole Miss. You had, so many opportunities to show that, this was it. But other than the scheduled Board of Regents meeting on Thursday where they finally made the decision, it sounds like, y'all's guess is as good as mine. I don't understand. Maybe they expected to lose to Mississippi State, and it would have been awkward to go back on that decision and wait till the end of the year. Obviously, you want to get ahead of the coaching carousel. A&M is going to be the most high-profile, likely, unless something crazy happens, the most high-profile opening on the market. But you want to get ahead of that. You want to try to keep your recruiting class together. So that's why it's in November. But it just seems odd, right? Y'all's guess is as good as mine.
Yeah, I think, Trey, you kind of hit on it. I think you have to be able to get ahead of stuff before the portal just opens and everyone's out, right?
Well, they have an immediate 30-day opening, so that's not even
right. But what I'm saying is, if it's just portal time and everybody's engaged in the portal like they are at the end of the season, then all the coaches are going to be calling and everybody else. And so, though they are going to get calls, it's not maybe as bad as it could have been if they wait till the end of the year. And I also think it gives you more time to get in front of them and say, hey, look, here's kind of our vision. Just like stick here for the rest of the season, play here for the rest of the season. Remember some of the good stuff. And then, we're moving on from there, right? It's not going to save everybody. You're not going to keep the whole roster intact. That never happens when anybody gets fired. So obviously there's going to be some losses and probably some pretty significant losses. But the other thing it lets you do is it lets you hopefully try to get a guy in place so that you can work the reverse of that and say, hey, not just stop the roster from blowing up, but also, do you have any targets from the portal that you want to go after? if you start the process early, you get to keep your roster in a better spot. And I think the goal is just to not blow up the roster. Now, as far as the timing, I think you really just have I think there's really two options here. Either number one, the board just got together and they had been hearing it from everybody, right? And all their friends been, telling them, "Oh my gosh, you guys are jokers. You can't even afford a buyout. You get into blah blah blah," and they're just getting pissed, right? And so they decided to make a hasty decision where they're like, "You know what? Get him out. I'm not hearing it anymore." Like that's a possibility. I don't really think that's what happened, but I think it's.
And can I interject here, Garrett?
Yeah.
If you're a neutral fan listening to this and thinking that's not how big business at the college athletics level is done, spend some time in College Station. you will change.
No, yeah, for sure. Well, and again, like it seems like that would be crazy, but again, we're Aggies, we kind of get some of that. But I don't think that was it. I think what's probably more likely is there have been conversations about this happening since, take your pick, Bama, Tennessee, something like that, where they've been having conversations about, hey, so assuming that this goes wrong, who do we want to target? And I think they have some kind of a list where they think, I can go get this guy or I can go get this guy, and we can put those guys in place sooner. And maybe have those conversations ahead of time with some of the players currently on the roster, maybe have those conversations with some of the recruits about, hey, here's some of the guys we're thinking about targeting, and put together a plan as an athletic department to stop things from spiraling out of control. I think that's the only reason you do it now as opposed to later in the season, because you are ahead of it, right? If you're not ahead of it, if you haven't made calls, if you don't have any idea on feelers, you're probably not doing this morning. Right. But if you have some calls out, if you have some ideas, there's a good chance you're doing this.
And to your point, Garrett, it feels like, watching that game in hindsight from last night, it feels like the players had to know something was up, right? Like they had just a different body language. Maybe it was, completely Henderson at the quarterback position. But
well, look, competence will do that.
There was just a completely different vibe on that sideline last night. It felt like everyone was playing more loose, right? Everyone was having fun, not scared to make a mistake. Maybe it was a quarterback change, but maybe it was also they knew something was up behind the scenes.
I do think from talking with folks and with reading kind of some of the local reporting, there were a lot of Ags that found out, players, that found out on social media that Jimbo was being fired. So I don't think the players knew anything. I do wonder if Bobby Petrino was more freed up to call the offense yesterday.
Sure.
The offense, when you look at the X's and O's, the offense didn't exactly explode like the scoreboard would indicate. The defense gave them a lot of short fields, 4 turnovers, I think, forced last night, including a scoop and score. And so I still think there's a long way to go for this A&M offense, but I don't think the players knew anything based off of what I was hearing this morning.
Yeah, last night's results were probably entirely a shot in the arm from a quarterback who made your, kind of, lame excuse for an offensive line, made them look a lot better. And then you combine that with the fact that you have a really bad Mississippi State team who is still reeling from stuff, and they're still just a really bad squad. It's hard to think, though, that, a guy like Max Johnson doesn't go out there and then A&M ends up winning this game like 30-17 or something like that, just because Max is not as mobile as Henderson is, clearly, and he wasn't able to overcome some of the deficiencies up front. Who knows what the game plan was? You'd have to really dive into that and see what they were actually planning on doing with Henderson before you get that. But, maybe the coaching staff knew that they could put their guys in a position to win. That would just seem to indicate something different from what we had seen the rest of the year.
I'm very interested to see what happens with the roster, with the recruits. I think that's kind of next. The next question is, what does happen with this roster? You've got it's a top 5 roster in college football, and there is no doubt that Jimbo has been the architect of that. Say what you will with the on-field performance, Jimbo is a heck of a recruiter, and he's brought in the biggest wealth of talent that Texas A&M has ever seen. There's no doubt that there are going to be guys that leave, that move on to other programs, and you just always have to expect that when you make a coaching change. But guys, as I had last heard, there's a good potential that the recruiting class coming in, most of the guys are still somewhat solid because of their commitment to the university. They're not committed to Jimbo. They're committed to the university. Now that is all
and those
hearsay.
NIL dollars.
Well, don't underestimate the connection with an assistant coach too. The thing that I've kept seeing is there are all these extensions for assistant coaches recently that came out. obviously, new staff, you can pick your guys, but I think a lot of trying to keep the roster together is going to be on assistant coaches being the guys that are still there. And guys like Elijah Robinson and all those other guys in that room, they're going to keep some guys on the boat that maybe otherwise would have left.
It's very possible. Now, yeah, whoever comes in as the next head coach,
They're still going to lose
um,
people. That's going to happen.
yeah, whoever comes in will get to pick their staff. But I think there is a potential that DJ Durkin or Bobby Petrino, one or both, could survive that, depending on who comes in, and we're going to talk about that next. Raymond Cottrell, a freshman wide receiver, has already said he plans to enter the portal. That's the only one I could find news on before we hit record today. So, a four-star wide receiver, a guy who flipped, I think, from Georgia super late in the cycle last year. A guy that probably just found an opportunity and decided to flip, not necessarily someone who'd been in the boat for a long time. But you think of all the talent in the wide receiving core, the talent on the defensive side, on the line especially, you're probably going to lose some of those guys, and that's just part of it, right? That's part of doing business. I described it earlier to one person as just ripping the band-aid off, right? It's going to hurt, it's going to suck, and there's going to be a little bit of a healing process afterwards, but it's better to get it done sooner rather than later, especially with a month to go before early signing day, the 30-day portal window opening. You want to have somebody in place and able to operate heading into the 2024 season. As we move into talking about who's next at Aggieland, there's a lot of names being thrown around. There's a lot of potential hires out there. I'll preface it by this, and I don't have a source behind this, just a feeling that I've gotten from talking to some insiders. I do think Texas A&M knows who their next head coach is going to be.
100% agree.
I've got the feeling that because of the confidence that the Board of Regents had on Thursday to go ahead and fire Jimbo, because of the timing of this news dump, and quite frankly, because of the timing and the way in which players found out, I get the feeling that whether it's being announced even internally or not, A&M has somebody on the hook. And now we can dive into that list. I don't know where you guys want to start. There's a couple of names compiled between the Athletic, On Three, some guys that we had as well. How do you guys want to break this down?
I think, just top tier, number one best guy theoretically available to me would be Dan Lanning. Mitch, I know you have talked to some people that say that that's not really a realistic possibility.
Yep.
I would still personally make Dan Lanning tell me no. Just from what he's done, he has obviously ties to the SEC. Maybe he wants to come back down south. Maybe he's tired of the cold and wet weather up in Oregon, and he wants to come back down south. I don't know. I'm making him tell me no first. Then I'm calling Mike Elko. I know that's kind of a divisive name in the A&M fan base right now, but Jimbo's best teams, and arguably what kept this from happening sooner, was Mike Elko. He has connections here already. He has the recruiting connections. He's an amazing defensive mind. He's done more with less at Duke than almost anybody in their entire history in his 2 years there. I'm okay with making that call. My off the wall selection, and maybe you guys want to get into your more realistic ones first before I go to my off the wall selection. But I'll throw it out there. I'm calling Rhett Lashley. I'm switching it up. I want that offensive mind. I'm pairing Rhett Lashley with an elite defensive coordinator, not DJ Durkin. I'm pairing Rhett Lashley with an elite defensive coordinator, schematic wise, that can just get the most out of the talent on hand. And I'm running the portal, right? Like he has done a great job in the portal. He has connections both in Texas high schools and in the transfer portal. That's what it's going to take to bring this program back. So I'm getting the guy that's done that and can run a modern, really effective offense.
Yeah, I think that sounds like an interesting call. Another off-the-wall guy that I don't think would happen, but a guy that I wouldn't mind getting a chance on would be a guy like Jamie Chadwell, right? Just kind of, if we're talking smaller schools who you like the idea of bringing a guy like that in, I wouldn't hate the idea of bringing in Jamie Chadwell at all. But in terms of kind of the big names getting thrown around, I think there's a lot of just like, that's not going to happen that I'm seeing right now. It's anytime somebody throws out a name like this, that fresh, they probably don't have any real information. They just say, oh, that would be cool, right? Like seen a lot of Urban Meyer. I
Oh,
can't see
no.
that happening. I just don't see how you're going to bring in another. Oh, but he won a championship. Yeah, well, we've heard that one before, right? That's not going to
Urban's
impress
at
as
least
much.
won a couple. Urban's won a few.
Correct. Urban Meyer has won more in his career than Jimbo did. I'm just saying it's not going to impress the A&M fan base. He's got skins on the wall. Okay, well, I guess Jimbo had skin on the wall, but whatever.
Fool me twice.
Not at least not back to back. Maybe he's the next coaching hire, but no, like Dan Lanning, I can't see that happening. I agree. You got to give him a call. People throwing out Kalen DeBoer as well. Like I don't see how you take a guy out of a current playoff race with his team when they've got money and they've got the ability to hold the guy that is building something. I just don't see how you do that at the
I
moment.
will say real quick, Garrett, with Kalen DeBoer and Dan Lanning, what I haven't heard a lot of people talking about is maybe they don't want the headache of the Big Ten travel that they're about to get into, right? Like
That's a possibility.
Like maybe those guys are looking at their schedule next year and saying, I got to go to, Iowa. I have to go to, I don't remember their schedules off the top of my head, but I'm flying to all of my conference road games
Piscataway.
next year. Yeah, Piscataway, New Jersey. Like I could be in College Station and, going to Baton Rouge, Tuscaloosa, Austin, Norman, places like that instead. And that sounds way more long term. That sounds better for my long term sanity.
There's always factors, right? There's always just random things that matter, and they'll think like, oh, but like school districts, or like one of the reasons Jimbo was at A&M had to do with the healthcare situation, right? Being close to Houston for some of his kids' needs there. But I think there's all sorts of weird things that always factor in. I just can't imagine pulling a guy away from, hey, you've got guaranteed money right now. You've got a fan base that believes in. If you're Oregon, if you're like the Oregon fan base right now, Dan Lanning can do no wrong because he's a great coach and he's got you in a playoff hunt. And even if he doesn't quite pull you over the top, you're still probably looking at a Rose Bowl this year, which would be a pretty fantastic step in the right direction for Oregon. And if you're Kalen DeBoer, again, kind of same thing, playoff hunt. You got some elite talent. Maybe it's you realize next year your roster doesn't look as good, so you make the jump. That could be a possibility, but I just don't see either of those two things happening. I also don't see them getting a guy like Dan Campbell, or I even saw Dan Quinn get thrown out there on one of the lists. It's like this. You're just not going to pull an NFL guy, I don't think. I know Dan Campbell is an Aggie. I just don't see a way where he can actually show up and get pulled from his situation with the Lions right now. That just doesn't make sense to me.
You don't think the PC principal wants to come on down and
look, it would make me happy. I'd love Dan Campbell. When it comes down to like my order that I put guys on, my order here for preferred candidate was Lanning at number 1, Campbell at number 2, and Elko at number 3. I think Elko is your most realistic of the names thrown around. Leipold, he's committed to Kansas long term. He's talked about that. And there's just a lot of names that have been thrown around, right? There's a lot of names that get thrown around with this. I just think you kind of have to be realistic and say there's some guys who aren't going to leave their situation. And though you should do your due diligence and call some people, you're not going to get certain guys. So if we're just talking realistic, I think best case scenario is go find a guy who's currently at a Power 5 program that you like and you think can do this and be steady because you believe you can pull the talent and you've changed the perspective and that you have the facilities to keep recruiting at a high level. You're just going to get a guy who's going to do something with it. Or you just get a guy who's a little young, a little hungry, ready for his opportunity. A guy like a Jeff Traylor, Rhett Lashley, Jamie Chadwell, one of those guys. You just say, here's your opportunity. You get you're running the big program now. Show me what you can do. I think those are kind of your two routes you take here.
One name that you haven't brought up yet is Glenn Schumann, Georgia defensive coordinator. A guy who has 6 national championship rings during his time on staff of these different programs. As I mentioned, defensive coordinator for the Bulldogs right now. Certainly feels like the next Dan Lanning, right? He's only 33 years old, up-and-coming guy, has yet to get his first command. How do y'all feel about turning the reins over in College Station to someone who hasn't coached at this level before as a head coach, but also is young, is hungry, and is presumably looking to make a name for themselves?
I feel like I don't think A&M's going to hire someone without Power 5 coaching experience. That's just me. I don't think you
Head
fired
coaching experience, you mean?
Power 5 head coaching
Yeah.
experience. Yeah. Like I think you have to at least coach at the Power 5 level. I think that's a non-starter to me right now. I mean, I have seen some people hinting that maybe there's eyeballs looking over towards Austin, what's happened with Steve Sarkisian, but even Sarkisian was a Power 5 head coach before going and being an offensive coordinator with Nick Saban, of course. So, guys, to me, and that kind of leads me into my biggest thing about this is like, Garrett, you were with me on that cold December day at Easterwood Airport
Yeah.
in 2018. We went to the freaking airport to see Jimbo get off the plane and walk down the maroon carpet. I was interviewed by KBTX.
Yeah, you got to interview with the local news. Yeah.
Yeah, I that was my start in media, I guess. But no one that we've talked about, except for maybe Dan Lanning, is going to get me as excited as Jimbo Fisher got me in 2018 or 2017, excuse me. So,
You mean you wouldn't go drive there for an Urban Meyer appearance?
no, I would not, and certainly not Lane Kiffin. If we hire Lane Kiffin, I might quit, guys. I might quit the show. Like I was joking with Mitch about that earlier. Like if A&M hires Lane Kiffin, I'm going to have to detox from college football. Pretty significantly.
Look,
That
as
would
much
be
as we hate
disgusting.
it, I would respect your decision. That makes a lot of sense.
You guys can come with me. We can go follow high school football, or I don't know, like just get that out of here. But
The baseball offseason podcast.
yes, absolutely. We'll shift to a college baseball podcast. Follow Jim
Yeah, there you
Schlossnagle. But none of these candidates are going to get me as excited as I was about Jimbo in 2017, and that just kind of makes me sad, right? It kind of bums me out that for all the jokes, like the jokes have obviously written themselves with the blank plaque and the boots and, you know, the fully guaranteed contract that it took to get Jimbo Fisher here. For all of that to come up just completely empty is just, it's just sad to me to be sitting here, you know, 6 years later with nothing coming out of that and sitting here having to start all over and not really being excited about a guy that's going to come in and take over.
What about Jeff Traylor? Now, I know
No.
you guys. I know you just said Power 5 coaching experience, but that is another name that is getting a ton of smoke today. Jeff Traylor obviously is one at the highest level of high school football in the state of Texas. He's then parlayed that into success at UTSA. He's a local guy. He gets his guys to play hard. Trey, I understand what you just said about Power 5 experience. So Garrett, maybe let's start with you. It would be a leap, right? But it is a head coach who has had some experience and success and is known to have his guys love him and play hard for him. Jeff Traylor and Maroon, does that move the needle for you?
Not that much. I think my thing with this is if you're going to go after a guy who's coaching at the G5 level, I think you have to have a guy that's proven it over a longer track record. And I know that's kind of crazy to say with UTSA, but like UTSA has been really, really good at one of the lowest levels of college football, at least at the D1 level that you can play at for a while. And then he made this jump, and it's not that they're necessarily struggling, but they're not maybe as dominant as they had looked in previous years.
They've had injuries this year. Frank
Sure,
Harris
yeah, sure,
wasn't
and that's
healthy all through non-conference.
yes, totally agree. I'm just saying, I think I would like to see somebody who has a better, more dominant program long term than where Traylor's been. I don't hate the name; it's a great culture fit. I think he would just, I mean, melt perfectly with what everyone's doing at A&M. But I think you can get a better, more proven, more established coach if you're going after a guy like Traylor. I think the reason you go after a guy like Traylor is because a couple people have told you no, and I think that's where you would end up. And that's not necessarily a bad place to end up, but I don't think it would be the splash or the wow, that's awesome, or even even the the big like how do we keep the roster together? That's not going to be a how do you keep the roster together type of move, right? There's a chance that for a guy like Elko probably recruited some of the guys on the roster, even if he didn't directly coach them. So that would be a move that you can make to keep the roster in place, right? There's other guys too that, if you're looking at a guy like Dan Lanning, he walks into a room, you respect him for what he did at Oregon, you can respect that and keep it rocking. even a guy like Glenn Schumann, there's still probably some overlap in who Georgia's recruiting and then who A&M's recruiting. So there's still some kind of I know who this guy is. I don't think probably most of the recruit, and this is not to knock anything that UTSA is doing, but I don't think most of the recruits on A&M's roster probably had substantial conversations with Jeff Traylor at any point.
And my thing with Jeff Traylor is, and we can see this time and time again, I need to see that somebody can do it without an exceptional talent at quarterback, right? Like, shoot, maybe I'm spoiled, but I wouldn't even be like pumped about Dabo Sweeney if we somehow landed him, right? Because we haven't seen him do it without a Deshaun Watson or a Trevor
Also,
Lawrence.
he's kind of a jerk, but whatever.
Well, yeah, that for other personal
As soon
reasons.
as stuff doesn't go right, he's sticking in the mud. Maybe some fans need to get off the bandwagon.
Well, I mean, do you want that or execution, I guess? But Jeff Traylor, he's been great at UTSA, but Frank Harris has been responsible for a lot of that in my mind. Like I almost feel like he needs another couple years in the American, showing that he can win without a clear advantage at quarterback every single week.
I think that's very fair. So, kind of by process of elimination here, you've whittled down our list to two names that I'm really looking at, right? Lance Leipold at Kansas, Mike Elko at Duke. Leipold, as late as last week, was saying he was viewing Kansas as potentially his last ever coaching job, right? He wants to invest. He wants to stay there, build something. Elko has not said any such thing at Duke. He's done a heck of a job, is certainly being heavily pursued by teams like Michigan State to come over and take that vacancy. If Elko were to return to College Station, I will say one knock that we had on Elko while he was here was that reportedly he didn't like to recruit, that the assistants were the ones that were going out and recruiting. And so Elko wasn't super active on that front, but yet you see what he's done at Duke and how quickly he's gotten momentum going in that program. Do you chalk that up as just rumors while he was here at Texas A&M? How do you sort through that? Would you be happy with Elko in College Station?
I think that would be a good hire. I think I'd be fine with that as the hire. Again, like kind of Trey said, I'm not jazzed. I'm not going to the airport to meet Mike Elko, but I think that would be a really solid hire. And I think that the whole recruiting thing, whether it was true or not when he was here, you don't really get that option when you're the head coach. And so I think he's had a couple of years to do that in a little bit of a smaller market, a little bit of smaller school, not as much attention or eyeballs. You've gotten a couple of years to kind of get used to what that looks like. I don't think he'd have an issue coming back and doing recruiting, whether that's his preferred thing or not. There's that. And the other thing about it for A&M at least is that when it comes to recruiting, there's so much like just about the school and about the infrastructure that happens for the recruiting. You don't necessarily need to recruit as a head coach at that elite of a level to get a lot of these guys. You're a big school, big, NIL fund, big facilities, everything else. You're going to be fine with a lot of the recruits.
I'm wondering where we go from here. I'm wondering, like I said, like I let off this rapid reaction show with, I think Texas A&M knows who their next head coach is going to be. Listening to and watching some stuff from Billy Lucci, Texas A&M insider, he says to expect this to not be the over-the-top contract that Jimbo Fisher was offered, right? And, like is not, you're not bringing in somebody who has a national championship on their recent resume. So that makes sense. But for A&M to dial it back and hopefully focus on the things that matter, hopefully focus on a young, hungry coach who is going to be able to galvanize the locker room. That was where it seemed like Jimbo outstayed his welcome a little bit, was when he lost the locker room last year. And then you have those road losses, close road losses, but still they continue to mount. It sounded like the Ole Miss loss was the nail in the coffin for Jimbo. And so for me, no matter who comes in, my top three that I wrote down were Leipold, DeBoer, and Elko. Who knows if the first two of those are realistic? Who knows if Elko would return to College Station? Maybe if he's going to leave Duke, maybe he'd rather go up to East Lansing and take over Michigan State. I don't know. But it is a wait and see moment. It is a full scale coaching search going on in College Station. And I think there's going to have to be a lot of soul searching within the program, right? Um, they got this one wrong and it fell apart in a disastrous way. And it could not be worse timing, right? Heading into the expanded SEC in 2024, Texas is on the rise, a shot at making it to the college football playoff. You had, if you're the Aggies, you had a chance to seize the bull by the horns, to be the first Texas team in the college football, or I guess the flagship program's first Texas team in the college football playoff. You let that slide by. TCU got that honor. And now you might not even be the second guest to the party because while you thought you were building into something spectacular, Texas actually was. And now Texas is on the door, knocking on the door of that first college football playoff. As we wrap up this and get out of here, I think we have to mention some other happenings in the world of the coaching carousel. It seems like A&M truly broke the seal on the coaching carousel. Arkansas has I don't know if it's official. I saw that they were getting ready to fire Sam Pittman. That was reported by a couple of their insider networks. So I don't know if that's happened or not. But after getting drubbed by Auburn yesterday, that would not surprise me. Gus Malzahn expected to be the next head coach for Woo Pig. It seems like it could be a pretty good fit in Fayetteville.
Yeah, I mean, he had success at Arkansas State. I think he runs an offense that's really good for the talent that Arkansas can get. And who knows, maybe he's thinking that he's reached his ceiling at UCF with, what they can do in the Big 12. But I think that'd be a great hire for the Arkansas Razorbacks.
Yeah, I agree. That'd be a great hire.
Elsewhere, Andy Avalos is out at Boise State. He went 22-14 in his time on the blue turf. And Mike Yursich fired by Penn State. I saw a lot of the South Park gifs of Timmy getting thrown under the bus in regards to the Mike Yursich tweet. Listen, it needed to happen, I think, as Trey and I made that very clear. Penn State yesterday was less than inspiring on offense. But in my mind, the issue starts with the top. That is not solely a Yursich problem. That's a James Franklin problem.
Yeah, it's a systemic issue. And I think maybe we will get the answer to the poll that we talked about last night. Maybe if James Franklin's out there looking for a new gig, we'll get the answer to the poll. Would you rather have Jimbo Fisher or James Franklin in 2024?
That's a good question. Let me look that up.
Maybe
fast.
They just coach swap.
Little trade. Yeah, we should have kept him on so we could make a trade, maybe pick up a first-round pick. And
yeah,
I don't know.
So
you see both rosters just the other direction. A&M's roster goes up, and then Penn State's roster comes down.
Now, reminder: we put this poll out last night during our live show, so well before Texas A&M fired Jimbo Fisher. But ironically, 75% of the voters wanted Jimbo Fisher as opposed to James Franklin. So he's available. He's now open to potentially coach your team. Guys, I think that I think that should just about do it here on the live show. I don't really have anything else to say on the Jimbo front. Listen, he gave us some great times. He gave us some really rough times.
Would you guys agree that he left the program in a better place than he found it?
Yes. I would. Yes,
yeah.
Absolutely. And better facilities, better roster,
rally the donor base. Yeah.
There'll be a lot made, I think, about him not being able to adjust and him not being able to do this and do that, whatever else. But Jimbo, I think, did something, I think, underrated. And I think you're going to see this with a lot of programs, regardless of who they end up hiring or firing. He led A&M through the transition of the NIL era and the college football or the transfer portal era. And so I think that you have to look at that and say, okay, while other programs maybe, they fired their coach and then their whole roster left, right? And everybody was out. And now they're starting over and rebuilding from square one, and there's no excitement. While there's some teams like that, you've had a couple years to see how this works. You've had a couple years to see who's good at it and who's not good at it. And so teams now, even if you do look at a guy like, James Franklin at Penn State now, even if they choose to move on from James Franklin, have been able to see what it looks like to succeed in the transfer portal era and the NIL era. So they can go find somebody with some good perception and go hire that guy, right? And it's the same for A&M. They've got better facilities than they did. They've got a great NIL fund. They've got lots of ability to bring in guys, and they have a good reputation across the state and across kind of the South and their recruiting footprint. So they're going to be able to hire somebody who can come in and take that over, and kind of say, even if the last guy wasn't able to do it, now I can, right? And I think that's worth something.
Very, very curious to see how this all ends up. Of course, let us know your thoughts. Who should be the next head coach at Texas A&M? Jimbo Fisher out after 6 seasons at Texas A&M. We'll have more on this entire coaching search and the coaching carousel as it continues to spin. But for right now, for Trey Reeves, for Garrett Turney, I'm Mitch Mason. Thanks so much for joining us. Until next time, so long, everybody.
Gracious, how about